Hey guys, Stitches here, and welcome to the Abyss. I decided to start this video with a black screen, and I just wanted to say first off, it's been a minute since it's just been a minute since I've recorded one of these videos where I'm not just playing a game, but rather talking. I want to try to get back into the habit of doing more extraneous content, especially since I've been grinding really hard to just try and get videos put up ahead of time, but I have videos, recorded. Um, in fact, I think I have Minecraft recorded for a few months. So that's nice. By the time like Minecraft actually gets like halfway done, I might be fully done with the playthrough at that point. So, what's today's topic about then? Well, today's topic is rather interesting. Nintendo, 3 days ago, released this thing that said Pokemon Fire Red version and Pokemon Leaf Green version are coming to Nintendo Switch in multiple languages. This is insane, but I wanted to talk about it because a lot of people are kind of up in arms about it. But first, I kind of want to talk about how this was announced. It was properly announced, but initially the eShop pages went out like before the trailer, and people were like freaking out. And it was initially before that, it was leaked that they would be coming to the eShop. And this is honestly a very crazy situation that it's just like, oh, one of the biggest reveals they could probably say, like, these games that people have been wanting on Nintendo Switch for like a long time now. People have been wanting Pokemon, of old Pokemon available on Nintendo Switch, and now it's happening. This is actually nuts. And it got leaked. I guess I should talk about what these two games are as well. So these are Game Boy Advance remakes of Pokemon Red and Green for the Game Boy. They are Generation 3 remakes of Generation 1. The main reason for this was that in Generation 3, Pokemon made the jump from the Game Boy family of consoles to the Game Boy Advance family of consoles. What this meant was that you actually physically could not transfer Pokemon due to data limitations between Generation 2 and Generation 3 like you could with Generation 1 and 2. Generation 1 and 2 used a thing called the Time Machine, which allowed you to trade with trainers from the previous generation. The only thing was you couldn't send Pokemon that quote-unquote hadn't been discovered yet. So pretty much any of the Pokemon that were new in Generation 2 you couldn't send back, but any Pokemon that had a Pokedex number that was scrubbed past 150, you could actually trade forward, and it would, instead of being a glitched missing number Pokemon, it would actually be a proper species now due to its Pokedex ID being found in the game. I also realized that I don't have my capture cursor on. Oh, do I? I just wasn't clicked into the window, my bad. So, there was no feature for that between Gen 2 and Gen 3 due to Generation 3 changing so much, using a different cable for communication, etc. So they remade Pokemon Red and Green kind of as a way to help you reclaim the old Pokemon, especially because, well, Ruby and Sapphire, I would say, are probably some of the most popular titles in the series, acting as kind of a renaissance for Pokemon after Generation 2 honestly didn't do that well. Pokemon Fever, if you don't know, kind of like died down a little bit, where it was like the people who were there for the fad and the people who were there for the franchise were separated in Generation 2, and then Generation 3 kind of brought more people back and new people in. It was a lot more sleek, mainstream, Pokemon were now in color. In even better color than they used to be, so they were also in glorious 16-bit graphics. So yeah, that's part of the reason they remade Fire Red and Leaf Green, and that's why we'd also get in Generation 3 the Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD games, which would backport some Gen 2 Pokemon. Or not backport, but re-implement a lot of ways to obtain Gen 2 Pokemon. Including a more straightforward way to obtain Espeon and Umbreon, which previously you could only get in Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, because those games had clocks where Fire Red and Leaf Green didn't. They just didn't re-implement them. And so what did we get? We got Fire Red and Leaf Green, pretty good remakes, which I'll kind of talk about these remakes a little more as we go on, but that's the gist of it. And now we're getting these ported to Nintendo Switch because for a lot of people, these are the definitive Gen 1 experience. These are considered to this day to be the best way to experience Gen 1 since Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which came out on the Nintendo Switch a long time ago, like over 8 years ago now, I feel like. I don't know how long ago it was, but it was a while ago, and those are remakes of Pokemon Yellow, or rather, they're games that are heavily inspired by Pokemon Yellow, but were like new Kanto experiences. And people thought those were okay. I know some people who like them, some people who don't. It made divisive changes, like there was no battling wild Pokemon, just catching, and some people didn't like that. I personally never played the games. I thought about getting Pokemon Let's Go Eevee at one point, and I just never did. But those games are kind of like alternative sequels to the original Red and Blue that take inspiration from Fire Red and Leaf Green. And then there never was any other remake of Gen 1 outside of the Game Boy titles. Some people consider Pokemon Yellow the definitive edition of Gen 1. Some people consider Pokemon Red and Blue to be like flawless masterpieces, and I don't think that's true. I think Pokemon Red and Blue are very flawed, but are masterpieces in their own right. If anything, they're just indie games, because that's what they are. It was made by such a small studio back then. But anyways, let's get on with this article. There is a YouTube video. I guess I could play it. I've actually not watched this yet. Let's just turn that down to about half. So it's just kind of like a slideshow talking about Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green here. I guess I do have some criticisms about this trailer a little bit. My first kind of big criticism, I feel like there's a lot of spoilers in this trailer. I feel like kind of like showing that Blue is the champion is a little bit of a spoiler. And like, I know this game is really old, so like, really, who give a fuck, but, you know, it is whatever. But, you can play, it is on Nintendo Switch 1. But yeah, and then they do this weird maneuver at the end. Like, what is that? Like, hold on. They do this weird maneuver where they show the Game Boy Advance render, and then they just swap it out for the, or these two come in, then they swap it out for this, or for the Switch render. So these games will be available on February 27th, 2026. So they will be... they will be available on Pokemon Day, here in 4 days. So, you know, I'm recording this on the 23rd, but they'll be available on this date. So pretty soon. You can get your pre-orders in now. Smart of them to open up pre-orders, because this game I honestly would expect to fucking crash. Also, you might not be able to read this text here at the bottom. It's a little small, but it says, because this version replicates the way the game was originally released, each language version is separate, and there are no in-game options to change the language. Please verify the language of the game before completing your purchase. So, complaint number 1, to start, or that starts on complaint number 1, I guess. But let's read this first before I get ahead of myself. Capture wild Pokemon and recapture the nostalgic feeling of the Game Boy Advance system when the Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green games return for the first time in over 20 years on the Nintendo Switch system. Also playable on Switch 2. I don't know why it wouldn't be. For Pokemon Day on February 27th. I also want to I just want to point out that it's funny to me that they're like Pokemon Fire Red version and Pokemon Leaf Green version. Also, this one has the trademark and this one doesn't. I don't know why. I think they only show the trademark the first time on this article. But each of these digital-only releases are available individually in English, French, or Spanish on the My Nintendo Store and eShop. New and returning players can celebrate 30 years of Pokemon by exploring the Kanto region and reuniting with some of their favorite Pokemon and characters in their original settings. Longtime fans will enjoy taking a trip back to where it all began, while newcomers can experience firsthand some of the earliest appearances of iconic characters and settings. So, English, French, and Spanish are the only languages for this game. That's definitely gonna put a ding in my opinion of it. And these Nintendo Switch versions of the 2004 remakes, by the way, yes, these games are 21 years old. So, you know, they came out the same year I was born. In these Nintendo Switch versions of the 2004 remakes of the first Pokemon games, Pokemon Red and Green, originally released in Japan in 1996, players can encounter the game's original 151 Pokemon. Enjoy the classic soundtrack and turn-based gameplay and meet up with familiar faces like Brock, Misty, Professor Oak, and Giovanni. These classic Game Boy Advance RPGs feature all of the updates introduced in the Game Boy Advance eras, including abilities, natures, weather conditions, held items, and the ability to select your player character's gender. Nintendo Switch players can also now link up with friends via local co-op without the need to use a Game use a Game Boy link cable like you did in 2004. Fun fact, this isn't fully true. The Union Room existed. So actually, this game was like made to advertise the wireless link, and I think the wireless link like only worked with this and a few other games because it wasn't just a full-on replacement for the link cable. Get ready to experience the challenges and rewards of Kanto for the first time, or the first time in a long time. Pokemon Fire Red version in English, French, and Spanish. Pokemon Leaf Green version in English, French, and Spanish will be available for Nintendo Switch on My Nintendo Store and Nintendo eShop on February 27th. They will be available at select retailers launch week for suggested retail price of $19.99 USD. For more information on these products, please visit Nintendo.com. So it also links you down here, so you can also visit these. Also, I do think it's funny that the Spanish and French ones are longer, so like there's a different triangle over the left side of it. I don't know, that's just funny to me. So I want to start getting into some complaints about this, and also talking about why this is good, because I want to talk about my complaints with it, because being a Pokemon fan, I do love these, but I also do have my complaints. First of all, $20 is kind of a big asking price in my opinion. I feel like these should be $15 at most, and honestly, I would even go as far to say they should only be 10, considering the previous titles, which, if you remember, Generations 1 and 2 had similar releases on the Nintendo 3DS. But those were what am I trying to say? Those were only $10 each, and this is double the price. So, in a way, you are paying for just a remake of the same game you bought on your 3DS, or could have bought on your 3DS before that eShop closed. Rest in peace, 3DS eShop and Wii U eShop. But you know, it is kind of lame like that it's like, really, 20 fucking dollars for a Game Boy Advance title in the big 26? Like, that's insane. And for a lot of people, that's gonna be a turnoff. Like, you know what else was $20 that came out recently? The Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 DLC. Yeah, I bet you didn't know I knew about that. To be honest, I've never played that game. It's just a game my younger brother plays. But that's also $20. That game is apparently not that great, but you know, that chapter is $20, and that's like an expansion for a game that's already been going. And that's like new content. This is like an old game being released for $20 in the modern day. Now, that's not to say like that I haven't paid $20 for a game just because it's been re-released. I want to say that's like how much Live Alive costs if you buy the HD 2D remake on Switch or Steam. And I'd say that game's really worth it because it wasn't ever officially translated, and its graphics, the HD 2D graphics style, I feel like really fits that game. You know, releasing these on Pokemon Day, fine. I feel like a lot of people expected this last year, though, where they were going to release Gen 1 on Pokemon Day. And I honestly think it's interesting that they're, like, re-releasing Fire Red and Leaf Green and not the OGs. Honestly, I kind of expected them to release them all at once, but I know, like, with Pokemon Home, it probably would be difficult. So, you know, it's whatever. It's, you know, it's fine. You know, $20, that's kind of just more of a middling thing for me. I'm glad it's not 25 or 30. If it was 30, that'd be like unforgivable. If it was 25, I'd be like noticeably pissed. But, you know, 20, you know, I feel like that's a somewhat fair asking price. But you do have to pay 40 if you want both versions, which is somewhat annoying as well. Now, one of the biggest elephants in the room as well is I do want to mention English, French, or Spanish. That is what these were originally released in. No new translations. You know, no Korean version. Strangely, no Japanese version. I wonder if for whatever reason they're just like keeping the Japanese version Japan exclusive. Like, so you have to have a Japanese Nintendo account to play it in Japanese. But I don't know, that's very weird to me. It could also be that these are only what are localized in my region. They could have more options available. But I think the fact that you have to buy each language separately for $20 as well is one of those things where it's like, you know, fucking really? You're telling me I have to pay $20 just to play my game in French on top of the $20 if I want to also be able to play the game in English? Not only that, but they're going to be in different save files as well, because I've already seen it. They are different, like, pieces of software on the Switch. And that's just baffling to me. I personally think this is kind of a little scummy, that it's like you can only buy it in one language. But probably the biggest thing I want to state is via local co-op, no online play. No online play is a big issue for this, okay? I know a lot of people who would love to be able to have online Gen 3 competitive in an official Pokemon game. Some people want to be able to play these games online competitively. Now, to sort of say I understand why there is no competitive play, like if I'm going to play devil's advocate here, even though I want to make it very apparent that I'm against the no online play thing, like a lot of emulators have the ability to do online play and link Game Boy Advance game cables together and stuff. I can understand not introducing online play with one, Pokemon Champions coming out being an online battle client for Pokemon, but two, also going to be that Pokemon Home has a built-in trading system, and I think you can do friend trades on that. I might be wrong. So yeah, like you're pretty much, it encourages in-person communication, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do understand that there are a lot of people like me who have friends who are all over the world, and, you know, it's gonna be sucked to be like, man, I wish we could play with each other, but, you know, I guess we can't because they didn't put online play in my Pokemon Fire Red game. That's also going to make it very hard to obtain version exclusives. There are version exclusives. I don't have the full list. But I know that there are definitely, I think Bellsprout's version exclusive to Leaf Green. I'm pretty sure Scyther is a Leaf Green exclusive as well. But also, I'm like, if you're gonna do this, why just stop here? Like, I just feel like this is kind of a shallow drop. Like, you know, why not go hog wild and just release, like, Pokemon Emerald, Ruby, and Sapphire as well? Like, if you did that, that would be amazing. A lot of people really want to play Pokemon Emerald, considering Pokemon Emerald technically never got a remake. There's a little bit of gray area when talking about the Delta episode portion of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which replicates portions of Pokemon Emerald's story while still telling an original story. But I know some people who don't like Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And honestly, I probably would buy Pokemon Emerald because it's just such a good game. And that's like the definitive Gen 3 experience, in my opinion, is Emerald. I think... I'm not for certain, but I think Emerald came out after this one. I don't know off the top of my head. But, you know, it's kind of like a cheap drop in my opinion. Maybe we'll get some more news on Pokemon Day. Like, talking about other things that'll be exciting. You know, there's probably going to be a Pokemon Presents on Pokemon Day anyway. But, you know, I feel like Pokemon's in a pretty decent spot right now. I thought Legends ZA was a very good game. It did have its flaws. And, you know, a lot of people have made the comparison that even this game, like, is not as graphically impressive as, like, other Game Boy Advance. And I honestly think that, like, the idea that Pokemon's kind of never been graphically impressive except for the DS era is a little interesting. That's an interesting topic to talk about because it's like, in the Game Boy Advance era, yeah, sure, a lot of RPGs look the same. I would say that Pokemon doesn't look that drastically different from, say, Link's Awakening. God, can you imagine if we got that? Oh, wait, they kind of tried that and it didn't work. I honestly feel like if we got a Link's Awakening DX, or Link's Awakening remastered version of this game, like, people would have lost their shit, especially since people didn't really dig the chibi art style of, a lot of people didn't dig the chibi art style of the Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. And, like, those games are remakes that have, like, very few changes, and a lot of which that are changes are just, like, small dialogue changes in that game. So, you know, a lot of people didn't like those games, though, and I think most of the reason why people didn't like Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl was just, oh, you know, they're, you know, they're Diamond and Pearl, and those are, like, a lot of people say Diamond and Pearl are, like, the worst games in the series, and I kind of get that, and, like, I personally feel like Platinum did a lot of heavy lifting for Gen 4, so whenever people are like, oh, Gen 4 was cool, Gen 4 was goated, guys, I'm like, I feel like you're talking about Platinum, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver, and not Diamond and Pearl. And even then, like, I feel like Platinum still has its flaws. And even more so with Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Like, Heart Gold and Soul Silver has an issue where, like, there's no way to play the Japanese version in English, because the Japanese version just has features that are removed in the English release. Like the Game Corner just not existing properly because they had to remove traditional gambling. Yeah, that was a change for the worse. But you can watch Chugga Conroy's videos talking about the Game Corner. He crashes out enough about it. Anyways, to talk though a little bit, to return more to the talk of like Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and also Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. some people are like, why don't we just get a remake of Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl? Um, or why don't we get a remake similar to that? And I honestly think the biggest reason is they don't want to spend that much money to do it. I do understand, like, you know, that would take development time, and they're probably already, like, tapped on development time for now. You know, Pokemon's always been a series that's, like, tight on development time. Like, we're talking they finish the game, and then they immediately go into developing the next game. That's why, like, if you look at a lot of the beta assets we have of Pokemon X and Y, there are a lot of placeholder 3D models where they're just 3D renderings of existing characters from Black and White. And a big reason for that is because of the fact that the development time between, like, Black and White, or the development break between Black and White and then X and Y, you know, was very short. And then they do this whole thing with, like, alternating teams, so it's like, oh yeah, no, the team that worked on this game will work on this game next. So that's kind of like why we go a game where it's like, oh, something's introduced and then something isn't. So, you know. But let's actually open the page for Fire Red and Leaf Green real quick. So you can pre-order the game. We can kind of see here. I don't know why there's two asterisks there. Is there anywhere that, like, describes what the asterisks need? So the game's only going to be 40 megabytes on each console. You can see, like, other extraneous info. Oh, it's down here. It's so weird. They put it all the way below, like, seeing the other games. Like, I have to look at Minecraft and MLB The Show 25. Oh man, that game looks amazing. God. Kirby Air Rider is pretty good though. Anyway, we're not talking about that. So, you know, my complaints with, like, them re-releasing this, there's also no physical version. I honestly think that's for the better. A lot of people like Mudahar complain about, like, e-waste versus, like, not actually owning your game. So, like, some people are like, oh, you know, we need to stop doing physical games because of e-waste. And other people are like, no, we need to do physical games so that we actually have a physical, like, right of ownership. Personally, I'm just kind of like, this is a game that did not warrant a physical version. In my opinion. That's just my opinion on it, though, is that, like, I don't think this warrants a physical version, so you can have, like, a bland ass plastic case that, let's be honest, you're probably just gonna put somewhere and never use. So, you know, it is what it is. Don't try to act all high and mighty of, like, I want the physical version. It's like, you're probably just gonna, like, complain when you have to switch the cartridge anyway. It's also only 40 megabytes. That's not really worth putting on a cartridge, just digital. Now, I've played Pokemon Fire Red before, and I will admit I have used an emulator to play it. I think it's a perfectly acceptable game, because now we're going to be talking about, like, what the actual game is like. And personally, it's an alright game. Gen 1's never been, like, my absolute favorite. And over time, I have just felt like, man, Gen 1 is just so barren compared to any other generation. Like, Generation 2, like, I've had new things pointed out to me about Generation 2, how like Generation 2 is really trying to be like a life simulation game in a lot of ways, where it's like, oh, you have to like actually do the time of day stuff, and there's like the version exclusives, but there's also time of day exclusives. And it's like, this isn't just meant to be Pokemon but with new Pokemon. It's meant to be like a full-on sequel. New areas, new story, new battles to have. New faces, new places. And then it's like Generation 3, like I feel like Pokemon Emerald, is very good game. I like Gen 3 a lot, and I think there's even merit to playing Ruby and Sapphire, since Emerald was kind of a pseudo sequel. They changed a lot. Pokemon Emerald actually changes who the champion and 8th gym leaders are, respectively. Since if you don't know, I'm gonna spoil this, but in Ruby and Sapphire, the 8th gym leader is someone known as Wallace. And Wallace is a water type trainer, where the champion is Steven, who's mainly known for using his Metagross, though his team is kind of more focused on like archaeology. Like, he uses a steel type, being Metagross, and then he uses the 2 fossil Pokemon of the game. So, that's kind of what his team is. But in Pokemon Emerald, Wallace is instead now the champion. Steven is now a side character who appears throughout the story, later appearing as a post-game super boss. And instead we have a new water type gym leader named Juan. Juan appears a couple times in the Pokemon series, but he's honestly one of the most forgotten characters ever. But, I feel like those games are just infinitely more impressive to me than Fire Red. And, like, Fire Red is good. Like, it's the Gen 1 experience, with a lot of its glitches fixed for Gen 3, because I think Gen 3, was, like, the most polished generation that Pokemon had been up until that point. Like, Generation 2 has a lot of embarrassing programming errors. To the point where, like, things just didn't work right, and Gen 3 changed a lot of underlying mechanics of Pokemon so that they were more streamlined. Like, Gen 3 changes a lot of systems to what they would be for their modern day counterparts. I believe it also fully tweaked the catch rate system, so I think Gen 2 tweaked the catch rate system, so instead of it being like, oh, the Pokeball, Great Ball, and Ultra Ball all work on like specific pools of Pokemon, it was actually related to the Pokemon's catch rate stat and everything. And their HP versus like, and just being like a blanket modifier, and rather than being like, oh, if it's used on these Pokemon, whatever. So, I think this generation, I think Fire Red and Leaf Green actually fixing that really helps. I think it really helps, to have that polish reapplied to the old games. Now, what else is there to say about Fire Red and Leaf Green? I don't think there's anything that really compromises it over the original Red and Green for me, or in my case, Red and Blue, since Green was not ever made available as Green version here in America. I personally think that Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, are upgrades over the originals, and I used to think that I'm like, oh, Pokemon Yellow is actually better than Fire Red and Leaf Green. I used to be quirky like that, I realized that that was a really stupid take. Pokemon Yellow is more of like a nostalgia bait, like anime bait type game. It did have the unique ability that it was like the one of a few games where you can obtain that region's starter Pokemon all like in full. So, you know, I think that's something. And something is better than nothing for Pokemon Yellow. But you start with Pikachu. Pikachu's not that good of a Pokemon, especially not in Gen 1. In fact, there was even a Pokemon Yellow inspired ROM hack of Fire Red and Leaf Green called Pokemon Ash Gray, where you kind of played through a story that was loosely based on the anime and first movie. And that game had to make changes to how the typing worked. Specifically, it made it so, I believe, instead of being immune to electricity, ground was just simply resisting it. So, you know, that game was interesting, but that's a ROM hack. We're not here to talk about it. I think these games are all right. Definitely, I would experience them if you haven't. So if you got 20 bucks, you want to experience the game, you can go ahead and buy it. I think paying 20 bucks for the promise of home support eventually is kind of like, eh. I've had my opinions about Pokemon home support, where I think it's dumb that the games don't just come out with immediate home compatibility. It's one of those things where I'm just like, it's so unbelievably stupid that they don't just come out with the compatibility, especially because it's like, you can do all that back end shit like before as long as the game is finished. But it seems like they procrastinate it in some way, or like there's some miscommunications between the companies, or they're like, oh no, we can't work on it until this time. And they're like, okay, well, we're releasing a game at this time, like 3 months before. So, you know, like, I want to say when Scarlet and Violet came out, it took them a while to get home support fully ready for those games. And, like, I know for a mainline entry, like, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. And yet, it's whatever. It is indeed whatever. So, I guess now is, like, my final thing. Should you buy? I personally think yes. I think this game is worth buying. But I'm gonna say, if you're not a fan of some Pokemon games, like if you weren't a fan of Pokemon, if you weren't a fan of like Pokemon's, like if you, what am I trying to say? If you weren't a fan of Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, you're probably not gonna like this game. Like, if you weren't a fan of how that game played, you probably won't like this game. This game is slower. It's like an old turn-based game, so it is like a slower paced game. It does use the random encounter system. I actually don't know if Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl used random encounters. I think it did. But you know, like, you've got to be aware of like what these things are. By the way, what is this screenshot? Like, what does this screen, like, just that you're on one island? Is that all that screenshot is? You know, this is one of those things where it's like, I do feel like you need to be like cautious as well. Another thing is that like some Pokemon you might know that you love in the modern games don't have moves that they wouldn't learn in the modern games. And the way types work in this game are different, where types actually determine whether a move is special or physical. I want to say that normal, fighting, ghost, and dark moves, or normal, fighting, ghost, dark, bug, and flying moves are all physical. And I think maybe rock and steel as well. Rock, ground, and steel are all physical as well. And then like everything else, like fire, water, grass. Fire, water, and grass are special. I want to say electricity is special. Like the physical special split didn't happen yet, so there is no like physical, or there's no physical fire moves, and there's no special normal moves in this game. Hyper Beam is actually like what Giga Impact would be in the modern games. That's why like you'll see some Pokemon where it's like, oh, when you transfer them forward like into Gen 4, they aren't as good because it's like, oh, Hyper Beam isn't as good on this Pokemon anymore. We got to teach it Giga Impact or whatever. So, you know, I just think that like you do kind of get this thing where you're like, oh, I have to know that stuff. So you might not be getting the game you think, especially if you played like Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee and you're like, I want to go back. There's also no fairy type. Fairy type was introduced in Generation 6. So every Pokemon that is fairy type is either loses its fairy type or just is a normal type in this game. Like, I don't know if you can even get them in this game, but the Togepi line is entirely normal type instead of fairy. Like, it's normal/normal flying for its line instead of fairy and fairy flying. Clefairy is normal type. Jigglypuff is just pure normal instead of fairy normal. So you lose out on a lot of moves. I've seen there are a lot of ROM hacks like of this game as well that are like Pokemon Fire Red like updated, where it's just like, this is a version of Pokemon Red with updated moves. Another thing I want to say is you're restricted to only Gen 1 Pokemon during the main story of this game. I'm assuming that the reason why they did this was Chuka Conroy made his take where he's like, there was kind of a stigma at the time, or like a mindset that like the new Pokemon are bad, so they were trying to restrict it to just the old Pokemon. But happiness is a mechanic in this game, so like, for example, Eevee cannot evolve into Espeon or Umbreon due to there being no day-night cycle, so the data for that just doesn't work. And there's a weird animation that happens if you were to try to level up a Golbat that has the correct friendship to evolve, where it just immediately cancels the evolution and just kind of does like a ... question mark. It's the only time the game actually prevents you from evolving a Pokemon, which does suck because I know a lot of people who like go back to Fire Red and they're like, I'm actually going to use Zubat since Crobat's pretty good, and it's like, sorry bud, Crobat is post-game only. Even then, I would only use Crobat actually in Gen 4 onward because I feel like it doesn't get a lot of its good moves in Gen 4 or until Gen 4. But you know, Crobat's like a slept-on Pokemon. Like, I think he's good. I just think he's neat. Like, I think he's a solid guy. So, should you buy it? Maybe. Like, if it interests you. I'm not going to say this is the definitive way. I will admit that, honestly, I would probably say if you have access somehow to play this game on an emulator where or can get this game at a cheaper price than $20, play it that way. Some other emulators have features that are just going to be better off than what you're getting in this package. Like, I guarantee you this is not going to have accelerate, so you're not going to be able to play at 2x or 16x speed. Some emulators now have a rewind function. Guarantee you this isn't going to have that. It's probably not going to have save states either, though honestly I don't think save states are very necessary in a Pokemon game. It's just one of those things where it's like, I think that you could buy this game, and if you haven't played this game, I would go play it. But that's my honest opinions on Fire Red's and Leaf Green's Switch port. Sorry if I sounded kind of messy. I made this video on a whim because I was just like, should I talk about it? I'll talk about it. And it's just like, you know, it's a game. We're kind of just like, oh, you know, like, I'm not sure whether this game is actually like the peak experience you can get for Pokemon at this time. I think even the DLCs, like, I think this Scarlet Violet DLC is $20. So if you played Scarlet and Violet and don't have the DLC, I'd honestly get the DLC before playing this. Even if you only have Sword and Shield, get that DLC. Actually, how much is the DLC for Scarlet and Violet? I don't know. I don't know. Treasure of Area 0. Hidden Treasure of Area 0, it was... If the thing will load. I'm loading it on my phone, so that way I don't have to switch tabs and everything. It is taking forever. Oh, the Hidden Treasure of Area 0 is actually $34. So, I mean, I guess, like, if you had that, and then, how much is... How much is the Sword and Shield expansion pass? It's being very weird because, like, it's trying to push down those results. The expansion pass for Shield was $40, so it's about double this. So, like, I don't know, like, if you could get your hands on Pokemon Shield, I feel like that is a good experience. I feel like Pokemon Sword and Shield are very good experiences, which now I feel like you could get for about $20. I don't know anymore because, like, used video game stores are weird now. Some of them still try to be like, well, you could buy digital at MSRP, so we're still selling used copies of the game at MSRP at like $5 below MSRP. And I'm just like, man, I came here so I could get the game like 30% off. Like, not so I could get the game at MSRP and someone already used the cartridge. It's like, what do you mean? But anyways, yeah, that's like my opinions of the game. I hope you guys are ready to play the game on the 27th. I'm very excited that it's out, that it's coming out on Switch. I think that's a good thing. I think it's good it is severed from Switch Online, because I think honestly that would have caused a lot of issues. If this game will have any compatibility with Switch Online's versions of Coliseum and XD, I'm not holding my breath, but I certainly would hope. And honestly, that's all I gotta say. So thank you all so much for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to hit the like button. You should also subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notifications. Be sure to check out my channel page, see the other stuff I do. I do Let's Plays mainly. And you can also check out the links in the description, find my social media pages. You can find my Twitch page where I live stream. By the way, my only two social media pages are on Blue Sky and Twitter. And additionally, you can find my Ko-Fi page where for $3 a month you get access to exclusive content as a monthly member. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one.